So before Islam, how was your life in regards to faith? What were you believing in?
I always believed in God. I was a Christian growing up. I was oftentimes in a Methodist church with my friends. I spent some time in the Mormon organization with my best friend in junior high. I studied a lot about religions, and I always knew that there was only one God, and I always knew that I had a deep connection there, but something always felt a little bit off. I would go to a Catholic church. For me, it felt very ritualistic, and it felt very hypocritical. There are some specifics about a Catholic church that really didn't sit well with me, but I was a child, and that's what my parents did, and I didn't really have a choice. And I always remember I left church feeling the same as I did when I walked in. And I always thought, like, shouldn't you feel uplifted if you're coming here? Shouldn't you feel something? And in the Catholic Church, it just felt like everything was just on this schedule. You had to say certain things at certain times. You had to do certain things at certain times. And all of this felt like it was really going through the motions for me.
In terms of faith, you looked into Methodist church or Mormon churches. What didn't make sense to you in Catholicism?
One of the big factors in Catholicism is they do a thing where you take communion in church. You take this wafer, the priest gives it to you, but you can only take it under certain situations. My mother was divorced, so she wasn't allowed to do that, as if she was impure. Everything was always about Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And it was always about how Jesus is so forgiving and this and that. And I said, so you don't think Jesus would allow my mom to do this? Like, you don't think that she would be forgiven? They went their separate ways. They're peaceful. They get along great. They're friends. Why is this such a terrible thing to do in your life? So much so that you aren't even allowed to do certain things in church. And I didn't like that. And then the Trinity didn't make sense to me. It's like Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Jesus and God are the same. Jesus is God in the flesh. No, it's not. I always thought, what is it that's going on down here on earth that God can't see, or that God can't hear, or that God needs to physically come down here to witness in person? That doesn't make sense. God sees everything. He doesn't need to come down here in the body of a man. And nothing was a major deal breaker, but it's a lot of little drops in a bucket where, okay, wait, that didn't really make sense. I'll let it slide. And the problem was that when I would ask the questions, they would never get answered.
In your opinion, what is the biggest and most obvious difference between your former faith, Christianity, and the religion now you believe in, Islam?
The biggest difference for me is the concept of Jesus being a prophet versus Jesus being part of a Trinity, because I believe that God is one. I have never thought that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, 1 + 1 + 1 does not equal 1. I always kind of search for something because that part, I never really agreed with all of that. And so I think the fact that we really examine Jesus's life and what he preached, not what the church preaches. So we look at, what did Jesus say? Jesus never said, worship me. Jesus never said, pray to me. And if Jesus had his face on the ground and he was praying, if he was God in the flesh, who would he be praying to? It doesn't make sense. And I know how things go, because when you're in a Christian church, it's just, this is what we believe. Like, how dare you question that? And I experienced that firsthand when I would ask pastors of not just one church, but several. And I would constantly get the same answers. And it's always like, believe that Jesus is God, pray to Jesus, don't ask questions. And I love that Islam says, oh, absolutely not. Don't take anybody's word for it, and you better ask questions.
So what was your view of Islam back then? Did you have any prejudice against Islam?
All we would see are these images of men in the streets, like, you know, Allahu Akbar, rallying and fighting, and they're showing them with, you know, big machine guns, and they're just portraying them on the actual news as if it was on a Hollywood set. We as Americans were fed this big lie about how Muslims are evil people and they're out to get us. No, they're not. I just thought it was this kind of mysterious religion that I didn't know about, nor did I have a reason to know about, because I thought it was so different than my own upbringing that I thought, well, you know, let them do their thing. I'll do my thing. I don't know. It seems kind of crazy. They're on carpets in public and I don't know what they're doing. Let them live.